loud. Um, my mind's gone completely blank at this moment, but I have notes here in case the blanks stay. So it says right at the top that my name's Marnie Beaubien, and I've attended Pine Grove for quite a long time, and I've always been involved in the Sunday school. And I've been coming to Take a Break for perhaps 10 years. I started when you were doing the Book of Ruth, which I enjoyed a lot. And at Pine Grove, I've always been involved in Sunday school, so I'm used to teaching Sunday school. And the book of Genesis and Exodus provides lots of good instruction through its stories for our youth. And when we returned at Pine Grove to in-person Sunday school after the lockdowns, we were able to reuse our Out of Egypt curriculum from the Gospel Project, which was a fun thing to do. And when we were making the decision to come out of the lockdown, Leslie Chapman and Karen Barrington and Colette Wright, each of them came to me and said, as soon as you're ready to go back, we're with you, we'll teach, we'll do whatever you ask. So it really energized me to have that kind of commitment. This seems loud, but maybe it's because I'm at the front. Anyways, in February 2022, we did the burning bush in Sunday school. And just to give you another background, Leslie, who's there, she surprised me every week with an amazing craft. And I usually didn't know till the craft was in front of me what it was, and it was always exciting. So for the burning bush, this is what she had for us. The kids made burning bushes with tissue paper, and the verse that we had that week is the one I'm going to focus on today. I am who I am. And I didn't give Leslie any warning, so there's no tissue paper at your tables this morning to work on while I speak. But Karen Barrington had gone south for a little holiday, and she outsourced her class to Joan Whitmer. And Joan Whitmer took things to a new level because she had the Whitmer team behind her. And when I came upstairs, we had burning bushes. We had bushes on fire. And here, there they are. So she brought in Christmas trees. They had lights, Christmas lights. They had flames all over the trees, all over the place. So unfortunately, I don't have any props this morning, but that's kind of what I'm used to, working with these folks. So I'm just going to pray now. Almighty Father, we want to thank you for revealing yourself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and in this supernatural way to Moses, Yahweh, the great I am, and for revealing yourself to us in so many ways, and particularly through your word. We ask that you open our hearts and minds today to the words that you want each of us to hear. We look forward to what you will show us. So I am used to a younger crowd, I have to say. Last week, Marjorie walked us through Moses' birth. I have to just check the screen. Last week, Marjorie walked us through Moses' birth, the faith of his mother Jochebed, and Moses' time in Egypt that led to his exile because he murdered some Egyptians. And we know from chapter 2 that Moses went to the land of Midian, married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a priest. And our narrative starts with Moses probably in his 80th year. Exodus 7:7 tells us that Moses was 80 years old when he went to speak to Pharaoh. So some of you might be turning 80, but this is where we're at. So I'm going to read the end of Exodus 2 just to give you some context, okay? So now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. So that was in that passage, but I just want to highlight, they cried for help. their cry ascended to heaven. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac, and he saw them. He took notice of them. And we've often talked in Take a Break, he's the God who hears and the God who sees. So right there at the end of Exodus, we're reminded of who God is in his care for these people. And he hadn't forgotten them. He took notice of them, and it was, he had made those promises 400 years ago. But today what we're going to do is we're going to focus really on God and how he reveals himself to us. Okay? So what I'm going to read all of Exodus 3, but not all at once. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Exodus 3, or you can follow what we have on the screen. And I want you to keep in mind that Moses is the writer of the first 5 books of the Bible. So these are his words. This is his story. This is what he chose to include. And the story of the burning bush is pivotal to our own story of faith. And we'll see how God reveals his nature in many ways. And we're going to read these ancient and living words carefully together. There's lots to consider and think about. And these words are living words that bring life. Okay? So we'll just, I might have to go over here to read it. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire. And behold, got mixed up there. In a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning up. And when the Lord saw that he turned to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, that's God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their outcry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. And now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Again, we just see in that last part, I am the God who hears and the God who sees. Okay? So, those of you who were expecting to see either Agnes or Kathleen up here, you're expecting a map, and I like maps, so I have one. I like maps a lot. We know Moses settled in Midian. He was now a shepherd looking after sheep, and he was far from his people. He was far from Egypt. He was far from civilization, and far from the life he had in that household of Pharaoh. And it says he came to the mountain of God, to Horeb. And this is possibly where Horeb is, at the bottom part of the Sinai Peninsula, and most people think Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are the same place. So that's where that is. Moses now had a new life, a family, and had learned a lot in these 40 years. What had he left behind in Egypt? Did he remember who he was? His mother's stories? Did he pray in those years? Had he tried to forget what happened? He must have been angry about how his people, the Hebrews, had been treated. He was passionate about that because we saw how angry he was. He killed an Egyptian, and he had 40 years to have been thinking about his actions. It's not really important, but I've lived in Ottawa exactly 40 years, so I know what 40 years is like. So we're just going to consider Moses a bit more. He was, by the way, I'm not going to talk about these paintings, but this is a very famous painting by William Blake, which I don't quite like, but it's a watercolor, and he looks like a very strong character in this picture. So he was alone with his sheep in the wilderness. He sees this burning bush, and the angel of the Lord is there, and God calls to him. And seems I missed something, but there's a tension here. God has come to Moses. He has stooped down. He calls him by name, and he's revealing himself to this highly educated outcast, shepherd, murderer, and yet Moses can't approach God. He's told to remove his dirty sandals. There's a fire, but the bush is not consumed, and we know that God is a consuming fire. He's a holy God, and Moses is not consumed. We are also on holy ground here when we're looking at these words. We know God is separate. He is holy. And at this point, Moses he might not even know who it is that's speaking to him when God calls him and this bush is burning and he's told to take his sandals off. But God, Elohim, declares who he is. He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in this passage, he tells it to him at least 3 times. And it's 400 years since these men were alive, and God had not forgotten his covenant with them. And he had shown grace to each of these men who weren't the best of characters, and he has not forgotten Moses. So Moses has been through a lot, and now God is coming to him. God is present with him. And I'm going to go over some of the texts that we've already looked at. So you don't have to worry about the highlighted colors, but I tend to like to, I could highlight every word for some reason, but I've chosen certain ones and for whatever meaning I have in my head. So what I just want to say is, just from the passage, there's a lot that's revealed to us about God, and he talks about seeing the oppression of my people. He calls them my people. These Hebrew slaves that are making bricks, he's calling them my people, and he's aware of their sufferings. And he says, I've come down to rescue him. And we know how he rescues them through Moses leading them out. But he says, I come down, and then he says, I want to bring them up from that land to the spacious land. So when you think of the kind of life that they have in Egypt, which later on they kind of wish they kept. But anyways, you think of that life, and he's saying, I'm going to bring you to this big, spacious land, and there's going to be milk and honey. He's just talking about how wonderful it is. And that's God's plan for them. So we see this, he's coming down to man, to Moses in particular, and he wants to lift the people up, okay? And again, I've emphasized this quite often, is the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression. So he knows all those things, and he knows those things about us. He knows our situation. So I'm just going to speak about the angel of the Lord for a bit. And often we hear about the angel of the Lord in the Bible. And I just wanted to talk about one instance in Genesis 16. We read that the angel of the Lord visited Hagar and found her in the desert, an outcast slave, a concubine that was carrying Abraham's son Ishmael. And you know, Sarah had treated her badly, and she was in the desert. And the angel of the Lord told her, "You will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction." So just to say there, the angel of the Lord was there. He was talking to Hagar, and he was saying, "You're going to name your son Ishmael because the Lord heard you." And she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God who sees me." Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai-roi, or Lara. So again, here's Hagar 400 plus years earlier, and the angel of the Lord came to her, and she realized, oh, he saw me in my situation. And now Moses is in the same situation. So, so we've got that. Again, God did not forget his people. Okay, now, you'll find in Exodus that Moses writes a lot of details, and it's quite repetitive, and Moses is given a lot of details of what's going to happen from God. And I don't know if you ever, sometimes when we start new jobs or a boss gives us a job, sometimes they assign us something that's very vague. We don't have a clue what we're supposed to do, and we just say, yep, and then it all works out. But Moses is given a lot of detail of how this is going to work, okay? So we'll just go to the next text, and I'll just read this. This is starting in verse 10. "And now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt." I'm just going to read that again. "And now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt." How would you like to get that task? This is a little bit different than Hagar's situation. He's left Egypt 40 years ago, and now God's saying, oh, you're just going to go back there and talk to Pharaoh. I'm sure Moses said, "What?" I don't know whether he responded in a second or there was a long pause or what happened. But then Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" And he said, that's God, "Assuredly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain, at Mount Horeb." And if you remember on the map how far that was, so Moses, he's probably thinking 100,000 people, I'm going to get them from Egypt to this mountain at Sinai. These men are laying bricks. They're making bricks. It's the economy of Egypt. It's how Egypt's thriving. And I'm going to take, and in Exodus 12, it actually says there's 600,000 men. So how is all that going to happen? And yet, God says, this is going to be your sign. You know you've done what I asked when you're at this mountain worshiping me. So that's like a vision into the future. Okay? And we're going to be going through these details over the next weeks. So now, then Moses says to God, "Behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "This is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. I am has sent me to you." So clearly God is not bothered by our questions. We can ask questions. And so Moses had these questions. And Moses had asked earlier, "Who am I that you're giving me this task?" And now God's answering, well, this is who I am. I am who I am. Okay? So just some thoughts on this. This is the first time God's saying this. I am who I am. And a lot has been written on this. And we could talk for a long time. I couldn't talk about it for a long time. But I am who I am. So we know it comes from the verb to be. It's a verb, I am. It sounds better in French, être, that verb to be. God is who he is. He's present. He exists. When they say self-existent, he brings things into existence. He's self-sufficient. It means he's eternal from the beginning, eternally. God's a person. I am. He does not change. He's present with us. He's immanent. He's right here, present. We have that word Emmanuel, but name hasn't been revealed to us. But he's present with us, and he's holy. He's separate. Those are all aspects of this word, this I am who I am. And last Sunday at Pine Grove, we sung the great I am, Yahweh. And that's how the sons of Israel called God Yahweh. They didn't even dare speak his name out loud. But we have the thought about Jesus. In the Gospel of John, the disciple John has written for us what Jesus said. And Jesus is the I am. And he had spoke to the people that he talked to in many ways, but he indicated that who he was when he said, and I just listed the chapters for you because it's good to read the whole chapter, but I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I am the true vine. So we have the benefit of what Christ has, and it just fleshes out who God is even more. And it shows to us that Jesus is God's Son. And Jesus also said, "Truly I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." So I find that kind of neat that when God was telling Moses who he was, who it was in the bush, when he said, "I am the God of Abraham," and when Jesus speaks, he says, "Before Abraham, I am." Okay? And now we're going to look at the details of the task that Moses was given. And these, I find these details quite incredible. There would be so much detail. And it's going to unfold in the weeks ahead here at Take a Break, that we'll see these details fleshed out. And Moses got to see how it was all fleshed out. So in verse 15, God furthermore said to Moses, "This is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name," Yahweh that we were talking about. "This is my name forever, and this is the name for all generations to use to call upon me. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the oppression of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey." I don't know, Leslie, maybe we should have them learn the names of those places, Canaanite, Hittite. That would be a good exercise. Okay, and then he says, "Then they will pay attention to what you say, and you and the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him," again, you recall I thought, it's a pretty big task, "The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now, please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God." So I've just highlighted that really to say that's the essence of what Moses is going to be asking for over the next few chapters of Exodus. Let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. And now we have what's going to happen when he goes to Pharaoh. And it's just incredible that God provides him all these details. I'm sure everyone here would love to know what's going to happen in the current situation that you're in, and we seem to not have those details. But Moses is going to go through a lot, and God's provided this. Okay? But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will reach out with my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it. And after that, he will let you go. And I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. But every woman shall ask her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house for articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. So the task is really monumental, and God has given Moses the experience of meeting with his father's God in person, in an intimate setting, and revealed his plan and some portion of his character to him. And a truth you could take from that is that God reveals himself to those he calls, and he calls all of us. This is our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He is our God, and he wants to meet with us. He knows each one of us. He wants us to know him, and he wants to lift us up. He is present. God is with us. He is for us. He loves us. You could say what he revealed of himself is that God is love. He hears, he wants to lift them up. So just think about that. And then we choose a song for the end of our messages, so just letting you know I'm at the end. And it was really hard to think of a song, and I picked two together, Same God and Forever Holy. But once I picked them, it was like every day I thought of another song that might work. It was like flooded with songs. But I wanted to point out this painting by Emily Carr, which I had at the beginning of my presentation initially, of a burning bush, but it's not a burning bush. It's an autumn tree. It's a tree in autumn is the title. And this fall, we have the option, we'll be seeing fabulous trees in glorious color, and I thought it might be a way for you to think about this burning bush and God's being present with us. So we'll go to that song.